Have you ever lived with someone for years and still felt like you never truly knew them? Not because they were distant, not because they were unkind, but because they never said what they really felt. They smiled, they nodded, they did what needed to be done. And somehow, life kept moving. Days turned into months, months turned into years, and silence became normal. This is a story about a mother like that, a woman who spoke very little but gave everything. The kind of person who wakes up before everyone else, who prepares meals quietly, who remembers small details that no one else notices, but never asks for anything in return. Not attention, not appreciation, not even understanding. At least, that's what her family believed. Because when someone never complains, we assume they are okay. When someone never asks for help, we think they don't need it. And when someone stays silent, we stop listening. In this family, the father was busy, always working, always tired. He believed he was doing the right thing, providing, supporting, being responsible. The children were growing, each with their own world, school, friends, dreams, distractions, and the mother was always there, in the background, like a quiet presence, like something constant, like something that would never change until one day something did. It didn't begin with an argument. There was no loud conflict, no dramatic moment, just a small detail that felt slightly different. Dinner was late. The table was not fully prepared. The house felt quieter than usual. At first, no one thought much of it. People get tired. People forget things. It happens. But then they noticed something else. She wasn't sitting at the table. She wasn't in the kitchen. She wasn't in her room. And that's when a strange feeling appeared. Not panic, not yet, just uncertainty. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't where she was supposed to be. And in that moment, a question slowly formed, a question no one had asked before. Where is she? When she is not taking care of us? It sounds like a simple question, but for this family, it was something deeper because they realized they didn't really know the answer. They knew what she did. They knew her routines. They knew her role, but they didn't know her inner world, what she felt, what she feared, what she had given up, and most importantly, what she had been holding inside all those years. That night, they found something. Not a message on a phone, not a note on the table, but a letter, carefully folded, placed somewhere it could be found, but not too easily, as if it had been waiting, waiting for the right moment, or maybe for someone to finally look. The envelope was simple, no decoration, no name written on the outside, just paper, plain, quiet, just like her. At first, no one wanted to open it, because somehow they felt that once they did, something would change, something they could not undo. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and sometimes so is regret. So slowly, carefully, they opened it, and inside were words. Words that had been waiting for years. Not angry words, not blaming words, but honest ones, clear, deep, and impossible to ignore. As they began to read, something unexpected happened. The room became quieter, heavier, as if every sentence was not just being read, but felt. Line by line, they discovered a truth they had never seen before, a truth hidden behind years of silence. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room has the loudest story, a story of sacrifice, of love, of things given up without being asked. And slowly, as the words unfolded, They began to understand something. Silence does not mean absence. It does not mean emptiness. It does not mean everything is okay. Sometimes, silence means, I have said everything already, but no one listened. And now, for the first time, they were listening, truly listening, not to her voice, but to her truth. And once you hear a truth like that, you cannot go back. You cannot pretend. You cannot ignore it because it changes the way you see everything, the past, the present, and even yourself. This story is not about a sudden disappearance. It is not about loss in the way you might expect. It is about something quieter, something deeper. The moment when a family realizes they have been living beside someone without truly seeing them, and the moment they are finally given a chance to understand. But here is the question: is understanding enough? Can you make up for years of silence with a few moments of realization? Can love, that was never fully expressed, be repaired? And what happens when the person who never spoke finally decides to tell the truth? Slowly, gently, this story will unfold. Not with noise, not with drama, but with something far more powerful: honesty. And in that honesty, you may find something familiar: a memory, a feeling, or maybe a quiet voice in your own life that you have not truly listened to yet. So take a moment, breathe, and listen closely, because sometimes the most important words are the ones that were never said out loud. The letter was longer than they expected, not just a few lines, not just a simple explanation, but pages filled with careful handwriting, the kind of writing that takes time, the kind of writing that comes from someone who has been thinking for many years. At first, no one spoke. They simply stood there, holding the paper, as if it might disappear, as if the words might change if they waited long enough, but they didn't. And the words stayed, quiet, clear, honest. The father was the first to sit down, slowly. He placed the letter on the table, then picked it up again, as if unsure whether he was ready to continue. The children stood nearby, not too close, not too far. There was a strange distance between them, not physical, but emotional, the kind of distance that forms when something important is about to be understood, but hasn't been yet. He began to read again, this time more slowly, more carefully, as if every word mattered, because now it did. The letter did not begin with blame. There were no accusations, no anger, no harsh sentences. Instead, it began with something simple. I don't know how to say these things out loud. That was the first line, and somehow it felt heavier than anything else. And because in that one sentence, they understood something. She had tried, maybe not in the way they expected, maybe not in the way they noticed, but she had tried and they had missed it. The next lines were gentle, soft, almost careful, as if she was still protecting them, even now. I was never good with words. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would be easier. I thought love could be shown without speaking. The daughter felt something move inside her chest, a memory, a small one, her mother sitting beside her when she was young, not saying much, just being there. She'd always thought that silence meant distance, but now she wasn't so sure. The son looked at the table. His hands were still, unusually still. He remembered something too: late nights, coming home, seeing the light still on in the kitchen, food waiting, no questions asked. He had thought that was normal, that was expected. He had never wondered what it cost her. The father continued reading. His voice was lower now, quieter, not because he wanted it that way, but because something inside him was changing. I watched all of you grow. I saw your struggles. I saw your happiness. And I was proud. There is a pause, a long one. He stopped reading for a moment, not because the sentence was difficult, but because it was too simple, too honest. And somehow, that made it harder to hear. He continued, but somewhere along the way, I disappeared. The room felt colder, not physically, but emotionally, because those words did not sound like something dramatic. They did not sound like a crisis, but they carried a quiet truth, a truth that had been building for years. I became what everyone needed: a mother, a wife, a helper, but I forgot how to be myself. The daughter looked up. Her eyes were no longer calm. There was confusion and something else, something close to guilt, because for the first time, she was asking herself a question. Who was her mother before all of this? Before the house, before the routine, before the silence? She didn't know, and that realization felt uncomfortable. The sun shifted slightly. He wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Because what could he say? He had never asked either. Not once. The father read on. I don't blame anyone. I chose this life too. I believed it was enough. There was another pause, short but meaningful. Most days, it was. That line changed everything because it was not a story of suffering. It was not a story of regret, not completely. It was something more complex, a life that was both full and empty at the same time. And that was harder to understand because it did not fit into simple ideas, good or bad, happy or sad, right or wrong. It was all of those things together. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I don't need anything from you. That part surprised them because they expected something else, a request, a demand, a need. But there was none, only honesty, only truth. And then came the line that none of them were ready for. I just wanted to be seen. The father stopped reading completely. The room was silent again, but this time it was different. This silence was not empty. It was full, full of realization, full of understanding, full of something that had been missing for a very long time. He placed the letter down. His hands were no longer steady, not shaking, but not still either, somewhere in between. The daughter sat down slowly, as if her body finally felt the weight of everything she had just heard. The son looked away, not because he didn't care, but because he did. And that made it harder. For years, they had believed that everything was fine because nothing was said, because nothing was broken, because life continued. But now, they understood something important. Silence can hide many things. And sometimes, the absence of problems does not mean the presence of happiness. The father picked up the letter again. There were still pages left, many pages. But now, he was no longer just reading. He was listening, truly listening. And with every word, the image he had of his life was slowly changing, not collapsing, but expanding, becoming something more real, more complete, more honest. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet question began to form. How many moments had he missed? How many signs had he ignored? Not on purpose, not with bad intention, but simply because he never thought to look. The letter continued, and so did the silence. But now, that silence was no longer the same. It was no longer a habit. It was no longer comfort. It had become a space where truth could finally exist. And as they sat there, together, for the first time in years, they were not just a family sharing a house, and they were people beginning to understand each other, slowly, carefully, but truly. And this was only the beginning. They did not finish the letter that night, not because there wasn't time, but because something inside them could not take any more. The words had already gone too deep, far deeper than they expected. And for the first time in years, they did not rush to move on. They did not turn on the television. They did not check their phones. They did not escape the moment. They stayed, sitting in the quiet, letting the truth settle, slowly, uncomfortably, but honestly. The father remained at the table, the letters still in his hands. He read the same lines again, not because he didn't understand them, but because now he was trying to feel them. I just wanted to be seen. That sentence repeated in his mind, again and again. And each time, it felt heavier because he began to realize something. Seeing someone is not the same as looking at them. Being in the same room is not the same as being present. And love, without attention, can slowly become invisible. He thought about the past, not in big moments, but in small ones, the kind that are easy to forget, mornings, evenings, ordinary days. He remembered walking into the house, tired, focused on work, thinking about responsibilities, and she was there, always there. He would nod, sometimes smile, sometimes say a few words, but rarely more than that, because in his mind, everything was already understood. She knew he was tired. He knew she was busy. There was no need to say more. Or so he believed. Now, he wasn't so sure. Across the room, the daughter sat quietly. Her thoughts were different, but just as heavy. She remembered conversations, or what she thought were conversations, short exchanges, simple questions. Did you eat? Are you tired? Do you need anything? At the time, they felt normal, even caring. But now, they felt incomplete because she could not remember a single moment when she asked her mother something deeper, something real, something that required listening, not just answering. The son stood near the window, looking outside, but not really seeing anything. His mind was somewhere else. He remembered frustration, moments when he felt misunderstood, moments when he wished his mother would say more, explain more, react more, but she didn't. And he had taken that silence as distance, as a lack of care. Now, he was beginning to question that belief. What if that silence was not empty? What if it was full of things he never tried to hear? The night passed slowly. No one said much, but something had changed, something important. They were no longer comfortable in the same way. But that discomfort was not a bad thing. It was awareness. And awareness is often the first step toward understanding. The next morning felt different, not dramatically, but noticeably. The house was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, more aware, more present. The father woke up earlier than usual, not because he had to, but because he couldn't sleep. The letter was still on the table, exactly where he left it. He walked toward it, slowly, and as if approaching something fragile. He sat down and began reading again, from the beginning, this time, alone, without anyone watching, without needing to hide his reactions, without needing to be strong. And as he read, something unexpected happened. He noticed things he missed before, Small details, subtle emotions, lines that carried more meaning than they first appeared. I learned to be quiet because I thought it kept peace. That line stayed with him because it revealed something important. Her silence was not natural. It was learned. It was chosen for a reason, and that reason was love. A quiet kind of love, the kind that sacrifices expression for harmony. But over time, even love like that can become invisible. The daughter came into the room. She saw her father reading again. She didn't speak. She just sat down across from him. For a moment, they looked at each other, not as father and daughter, but as two people trying to understand the same truth. He gently pushed the letter toward her, an invitation, not a command. She took it, carefully, and began reading from where he stopped. The son joined them later, quietly, without being called, without being asked. He simply came and sat because something told him this mattered. They didn't rush. They didn't skip ahead. They read slowly, together, sometimes stopping, sometimes repeating lines, sometimes just sitting in silence after a sentence, because some words need time, time to be understood, time to be felt, time to change something inside you. And this letter was full of those words, not dramatic, not emotional in a loud way, but deeply human, deeply real. And as the morning continued, they began to see a different picture, not just of her, but of themselves, their roles, their habits, their assumptions. They realized something difficult. They had not done anything wrong, not intentionally, but they had not done enough either. Not enough listening, not enough asking, not enough seeing. And sometimes that is how distance grows, not through conflict, but through absence. The absence of attention, the absence of curiosity, the absence of presence. By the time they reached the middle of the letter, they were no longer the same people who started reading it. Something had shifted, quietly, but permanently. They didn't know what would happen next. They didn't know where she was. They didn't know what she wanted. But for the first time, they were ready to ask, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, understanding. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Maybe this letter was not an ending, but a beginning of something they had never truly had before, a real connection, built not on routine, not on roles, but on truth, and the courage to finally see each other. They reached the part of the letter where the tone began to change, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gently, like a quiet shift in the wind that you only notice when you stop and pay attention. Until now, the words had been reflective, looking back, understanding, explaining, but this part felt different. It was no longer just about the past. It was about something else, something more uncertain, something closer to the present, and maybe to the future. The father held the page a little tighter, not because he was nervous, but because he could feel it. Something important was coming. He continued reading. I didn't leave because I was angry. The sentence was simple, but it carried weight, heavy weight, because without realizing it, they had all assumed something. That if she was gone, there must be a reason like anger or disappointment or pain that had finally become too much. But now, that assumption began to break. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. The daughter closed her eyes for a moment. That line felt like relief, but also something else, something harder to describe. Because if love was still there, then why leave? That question stayed in the air, unanswered, waiting. The son leaned forward slightly, without realizing it, as if his body was trying to get closer to the truth. The father kept reading. I left because I needed to understand who I am when I am not needed by everyone else. No one moved. No one spoke. But something inside each of them shifted again. This was not abandonment. This was not escape. This was something else, something they had never considered, the possibility that a person could lose themselves, not because of pain, but because of constant giving. I have spent so many years being what others needed, and I don't regret it. That line mattered. It mattered more than they expected, because it removed something: blame. She was not accusing them. She was not saying, "You took too much." She was saying, "I gave willingly." And that made it harder, because now they could not defend themselves. They could not argue. They could only listen and accept. But now I need to learn something new. I need to learn how to be myself again. The daughter's hands tightened slightly, not in anger, but in realization. She had never thought of her mother as someone still learning, still growing, still searching. She had always seen her as complete, stable, fixed. But now, that image was gone, replaced by something more real: a person, not just a role, a person with questions, with uncertainty, with a need to find something that had been lost. The son looked at the floor. His thoughts were quieter now, deeper. He was no longer trying to understand quickly. He was allowing himself to not fully understand yet. And somehow, that felt more honest. The father paused, not because he was tired, but because he needed a moment to breathe, to absorb, to accept, because something inside him was beginning to change, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. He continued, "I didn't know how to say this before. I didn't know how to ask for space. I didn't know how to explain something that I didn't fully understand myself." That line stayed with all of them because it revealed something important. Her silence was not strength, not entirely. It was also uncertainty, confusion, a lack of language for something deeply personal. And that made her silence more human, more fragile, more real. "I was afraid that if I spoke, I would be misunderstood. So I chose to say nothing." The father lowered the letter slightly. That sentence felt familiar, not because he had lived it the same way, but because he recognized the feeling, the fear of saying something important and not being heard, or worse, being misunderstood. And suddenly, he wondered, how many times had she almost spoken? How many moments had she been close to saying something real, but stopped? And how many of those moments had he missed completely? The daughter wiped her eyes quietly, not dramatically, not loudly, just a small movement, almost invisible, but meaningful. Because for the first time, she was not just reading her mother's words. She was feeling them, deeply, personally. The son finally spoke, a quiet voice, almost hesitant. "Do you think she'll come back?" It was the first question anyone had asked since they started reading. The father did not answer immediately, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know. And for once, he did not try to pretend that he did. "I don't know," he said softly, and that honesty felt new, different, real. The letter continued, "I am not far. I am safe. I just need time." Those lines brought something else, not relief, not completely, but something close, because now they knew this was not a disappearance. This was a pause, a space, a moment of separation, not to end something, but to understand it, to redefine it, to rebuild it in a different way. If you are reading this, it means you are finally listening. That line stopped everything again because it was true, painfully true. They were listening now, but only because she was no longer there, and that realization was not easy to accept. The father closed his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to feel, to let the truth settle, fully, without resistance, without excuse. When he opened them again, something had changed, not outside, but inside him. A quiet decision, not spoken, not declared, but real. He would not let this moment pass. He would not return to the old way, not this time. The daughter looked at her brother. For a moment, they shared something unspoken, an understanding, a question, and maybe a small hope. Because even though the situation felt uncertain, it also felt like something else, an opportunity, a chance to finally do something differently, to not just read the truth, but respond to it, and maybe, if they were willing to change, truly change, this story would not end in distance, but in something else, something quieter, but stronger, a connection built not on habit, but on understanding. And now, for the first time, they were ready to take that step. They did not finish the letter in one sitting, not because there was too much left to read, but because something more important had begun, something that could not be rushed, something that required more than reading. It required change, real change, the kind that does not happen in words alone, the kind that shows itself in what you do next. The father folded the letter carefully, not to hide it, but to protect it, as if it had become something fragile, something valuable, something alive. He placed it back on the table, but this time, it did not feel like an object. It felt like a presence, a quiet reminder of everything they had just begun to understand. No one told them what to do next. There was no clear answer, no instructions, no simple solution, only a feeling, a quiet knowing that if they returned to their old habits, this moment would disappear and everything would go back to the way it was. So they didn't, not this time. The first change was small, almost invisible, but it mattered. That evening, they sat together, not because it's routine, not because it was expected, but because they chose to. The table looked the same. The food was simple, nothing special, but something was different. There were no phones, no distractions, no quick escapes, just presence, real presence. At first, it felt unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because silence had always been easy. But now, silence felt different. It was no longer empty, it was full, full of things waiting to be said. The father spoke first, not as a leader, not as someone who had all the answers, but simply as a person trying. I think, he paused, searching for the right words, then continued, I think I didn't really see her. The words were simple, but honest, and that honesty opened something. The daughter nodded slowly. I didn't either, she said quietly. The son looked down, then spoke. I thought I understood her, but I didn't try to. There was no blame in their voices, no accusations, no defensiveness, just truth. And that made all the difference. Because truth, when spoken gently, does not break people. It connects them. And they talked that night, not perfectly, not smoothly, but sincerely. They asked questions, real questions, not about schedules, not about tasks, but about feelings, about memories, about things they had never asked before. And slowly, something began to rebuild, not the old connection, but a new one, stronger, more aware, more real. Days passed, and the changes continued, not in big dramatic ways, but in small, consistent ones. The father came home and paused before entering, just for a moment to remind himself to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. The daughter started asking different questions, not, "Did you eat?" but, "How are you really feeling today?" And she waited, listened, did not rush the answer. The son tried something new. He stayed, even when it felt uncomfortable. Even when he didn't know what to say, he stayed. And sometimes that was enough. They also did something else, something they had never done before. They wrote, not long letters, not complicated messages, just small notes, honest thoughts, things they found difficult to say out loud. They left them on the table, next to the letter she had written, and slowly, that table became something else. Not just a place for meals, but a place for truth. Weeks passed. Still, there was no sign of her, no message, no call. And yet, they did not feel abandoned, because now they understood she had not left them. She had stepped away to find something she had lost. And for the first time, they respected that fully. One morning, something unexpected happened. There was a small envelope on the table. No one saw who placed it there. No one heard the door, but it was there, quietly, waiting. The father picked it up, his hands steady, but his heart a little faster. He opened it slowly. Inside was a short note, nothing long, nothing complicated, just a few lines. "I can see that you are trying. I can feel it. Thank you for listening. I am coming home soon." No one spoke, not immediately, because this moment was not about excitement. It was about something deeper. Recognition. She had seen them, the way they had finally started to see her, and that meant everything. The daughter smiled softly, not widely, not dramatically, but with warmth, real warmth. The son let out a quiet breath, one he didn't realize he'd been holding for days, for weeks. The father closed his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to feel gratitude, deep gratitude, not just because she was coming back, but because they were no longer the same family. She had left. They were different now, not perfect, but aware, not distant, but trying, and that made all the difference. When she finally returned, there was no dramatic moment, no loud reunion, no overwhelming emotion, just a quiet evening. The door opened. She stepped inside, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Really looked. Maybe for the first time. There were no immediate words, because words were no longer the most important thing. Presence was. The father stepped forward, not quickly, not forcefully, just gently. "I'm listening now," he said. Simple, but real. The daughter moved closer. "I want to understand you," she added. The son followed. "I'll stay," he said quietly. She looked at them, not with surprise, not with doubt, but with something else, a quiet recognition, because she could feel it. They had changed, not because she left, but because they chose to see, finally. And in that moment, something new began. Not a return to the past, but the beginning of a different future, one built on attention, on honesty, on presence, and most importantly, on the courage to speak. and the willingness to truly listen. Thank you for listening to this story. If this story made you think about your own family, about the things left unsaid, about the moments you may have missed, then take a small step today. Ask one real question. Listen a little longer. Stay a little more present, because sometimes the biggest changes in our lives begin with the quietest choices.